Hate this lag here.
All right.
Okay. So I'm here with Mr. Patriarch from Cape Town, South Africa. So let's do a sound check.
Can you guys hear me okay?
But I'm hoping. It doesn't like we don't have any viewers here yet. No. When I get any viewers, the sound is okay.
All right.
All right. So you've now finished up your series on Italian fascism video.
Indeed, I have. Yes, it was. Being a new dad and all these sorts of things take a little bit longer than you anticipate. They're like, oh, it'll just be like 20-minute videos, and then you have to read books and stuff, and then like do it, and then by the time you get your kid to sleep and cleaned up after dinner, you're just like, ugh, I just don't want to do anything. But yeah, I finally finished it up. So I finished up my series on fascism, so I can cross that off the list.
And I noticed that this time you did name drop Ernst Nolte, who's the author of Three Faces of Fascism.
Yeah. No, in sort of my kind of different perspectives on in my last video, Nolte was one of the guys that I cited. Was him, and there's some other people. Most of them were mentioned in Godfrey's book, and then I sort of used that as kind of a reference jumping off point, and then kind of just sort of made sure that that was kind of their position. But yeah, no, it was really summed up, and that's a really great part about that book, Fascism: The Career of a Concept, is it goes into the historiography a little bit about kind of the differing theories on this particular Italian phenomenon. So yeah, very, very highly recommended.
All right. I'm gonna give a non-recommendation. I went and reviewed the very short introduction to fascism put out by Oxford last night, and it's by a guy named Passmore, and I don't remember it being so awful as it really is last time I read it, which was a couple years ago, but I would just avoid that one completely.
Okay. Well, you said by short introduction to fascism by Passmore?
Yeah, it's the Oxford has very short introductions, and like their one on Africa is really good. That may be the only one that is really good now that I come to think of it. But the one on Spanish Civil War isn't too bad. But the one on fascism is awful.
Okay. Best be avoided then, I guess.
So
I'm looking at it now. Yeah, by Kevin.
I'm not sure how to deal with the sun coming here. This is not my usual time.
Right. Where you were sitting just a second ago was pretty good.
Well, I didn't change where I was sitting. I just changed the angle.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Use the back of the laptop to kind of block the California sun here. All right, there we go. I have to completely rotate here. All right, so I have, I guess, kind of a strange question, but there was, of course, a conflict between Italy and Germany regarding the German-speaking population in Tyrol. And as a result, of course, this almost prevented the military alliance that came about later, the Pact of Steel, between Italy and Germany. If the Germans had pressed for national self-determination for the Germans in Tyrol the way they did, say, the Sudetendeutschen, and the Italians had resisted, and therefore done like they did in World War I and switched sides to the Allies, do you think fascism would be a bad word today? That we wouldn't have any negative connotations with fascism if they had fought against the Germans over Tyrol or any other issue?
Yeah, personally, I think probably not. It would be sort of one of those historical oddities, essentially. Overall, I think fascism was, in its time, if you compare it to other regimes, it wasn't particularly virulent, if you want to put it that way, in terms of how it, like, if you compare fascism of the Italian variety, if you compare sort of how violent or expansionary or repressive that regime was relative to others shortly before it, or even its contemporaries, it wasn't. I mean, I'm not saying it was great, but it's not like the nightmare, that the word is associated with today. So yeah, no, I would agree. It probably would, if Mussolini had sort of either pulled a Spain and sat the Second World War out, if that was kind of an option, then yeah, I think it probably would have, fascism would have been just sort of one of those funny footnotes in history. Who knows? Maybe it might have expanded beyond, but that's kind of my take. I don't think it would be the bad word it is today.
Well, I get the impression that the negative connotations of the word have nothing to do with the history of Italy and everything to do with the history of the USSR.
Yeah, that, and also the association with Nazism, of course. So
that association is entirely a result of Soviet policies, starting in 1934 when they started targeting German-speaking Mennonites as being fascist for receiving famine relief from Germany during the Holodomor.
Nice. Well, I mean, what would you expect of communists? Part of it is because to the person who's sort of uninitiated, there are obviously some aesthetic differences between fascism and Nazism, right? So the sort of martial aesthetic, the sort of cult of personality and stuff. So for a normie outside, you could see, oh yeah, they're probably pretty similar, but in terms of actual operation, they really weren't a whole lot. And what ends up happening is, once the Second World War gets going, what is called fascism is essentially the German model, because that becomes, comparatively speaking, so successful compared to the others, and sort of spreads its influence and whatnot through military means. And as a result, that kind of gets pinned to, what the word is, but that's not
right.
exactly
But the Germans never called themselves fascist. They called themselves National Socialists.
Mm-hmm.
And while there is recognition by Hitler and probably some other National Socialist leaders of inspiration from fascist Italy, they always maintained that it was primarily a German nationalist movement. That is something that was pretty much sui generis German, rather than something that was modeling itself after Mediterranean political systems.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree with that. Dr. Gottfried he says Nazism is kind of sui generis, and I think that's correct. It's a thing kind of off on its own, sort of set apart from kind of other political systems that you might find. And you're right. One of the things that I learned of interest from him is he was reading. He told me he was reading a biography on Ribbentrop, and I can't ever remember the guy's first name, but Ribbentrop. Yeah, Joachim Ribbentrop. Yeah, and in the biography, he was basically saying how he was having such a hard time trying to get the fascists on side, because they hated them. Essentially, the fascists are like, what? No, like we don't like what you guys are doing. You guys are, nah, like that's not our thing. That's not our bag. And this was up until like 1938 or something like that. So the idea that there's this brother spirit, that they're kind of just two sides of the same coin, I think isn't at all accurate.
No, and as I said, they almost came to blows over the issue of Tyrol, because one of the important pillars of National Socialist foreign policy was to champion the rights of Volksdeutsche outside of the borders of the Reich, and that it included a large number of German speakers that Italy had taken control of after World War One that had previously been
Right.
under Austrian rule.
Yeah, because South Tyrol, that's right up close to Switzerland, right? So the two
Yeah,
big
it's on
ones
the
that they got,
Austrian border.
yeah, the two big ones they got was Tyrol and then part of the coast of Dalmatia. That was kind
Yeah,
of
they got Istria
yeah,
in the which the Croatians wanted. But yeah, I talked about the NDH a little bit a couple of weeks ago. This Croatian movement under the Ustasha that gets a independent state after Yugoslavia falls apart. So there you have, I guess, that is much closer than Germany to the kind of original fascist model in Italy.
yeah. No, and that's the thing, and kind of in my series, why I focused pretty much exclusively on Italian fascism, because you do have some of these other elements, like in Croatia, like you were talking about, which are kind of fascistic, we could say. But I think kind of the issue with kind of for me, why I focused on Italian fascism specifically is I think once the Second World War gets started, what kind of happens is, as far as I understand, is a lot of these places like Croatia kind of become junior partners to the Third Reich, and then sort of their policies, whatever they may want for themselves, kind of get sidelined to sort of the German agenda to a certain extent. So they kind of get co-opted by the Germans essentially. So I think that's part of the reason why I focused on Italian fascism is it seemed to me kind of like fascism in its purest form, essentially. So
Right, because they're in power for
without too
over a
much.
decade before Hitler becomes chancellor.
Yeah, so there wasn't a lot of what you could say foreign policy pressures on them to sort of lean this way or that way. So and for that reason, they were kind of the case study for me.
All right. Last time you didn't get to go into it too much, and it's probably my fault for moving the conversation in a different direction. But before the Anschluss in 1938, you had kind of a Austrian Catholic movement inspired by Italian fascism under Dollfuss. So that obviously becomes null and void after annexation. But before that, how that movement seemed to me to be closer to Rome ideologically than Berlin.
Yeah, no, definitely. So in my readings, and also during kind of what I talked to Dr. Gottfried about, the Austrians are they're sort of they're called Austro-Fascists or clerical fascists, and they adopt some of the aesthetics of the fascist regime. They adopt the kind of corporatist sort of economy. They are sort of authoritarian one-party state. But what makes them different from normal fascists is they're explicitly Catholic and clerical. So in that way, they are more of a kind of traditional right-wing authoritarian Catholic regime. So they're a little less, they're definitely less revolutionary in terms of the cultural sense, but they do ally themselves with the Italians and rely on Italian support to a certain extent to sort of help prop up the regime, because at the time, as will be realized later, the Austrians were kind of threatened by the National Socialists, who were attempting and had previously attempted to kind of overtake the government, so as to kind of partially to make sort of an end run around that, and partially deal with other sort of domestic political problems. The Angerbelt Dollfuss ended up seizing control and sort of establishing the Austro-Fascist or clerical fascist regime in Austria. So yeah, they are much more akin to the Italian fascists than the National Socialists, absolutely. But they're also much more Catholic and pro-clerical than the Italian fascists were. So they were less revolutionary in that sense.
Okay.
And yeah, part of the reason. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think you're right that a lot of the fascist movements in Central Europe, Arrow Cross in Hungary or Iron Guard in Romania, kind of get, as it were, ideologically Germanized as the war goes on, particularly after the invasion of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, definitely. And this may be just speculation on my part, but what of course ends up happening to Dollfuss is the Nazis actually have him killed, and then shortly after that is the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. So I think partially in the back of Mussolini's mind, before leading up to the Pact of Steel, is he may be a little bit worried about getting the Dollfuss treatment if he if he doesn't play ball. Whether or not that is true, I'm not sure, but it's an interesting and seems to me a highly plausible reason for him to maybe want to side with the Germans at that particular point in time.
Yeah, but I think there are other factors. The thing is, there wasn't really anybody the Germans could replace Mussolini with. They're replacing Dollfuss with Hitler himself by annexing Austria into the Reich itself.
No, definitely, and I'm not sure about that, but I think that for certainly if they did try to get rid of El Duce, it would have. You're right. It would have been a little bit harder than with what they did with Austria. Do you need a sombrero or something?
I almost do. I gotta figure out just to keep going.
It's okay. Go ahead. You
have to move. Here.
Okay. All right. No problem. No problemo.
Away from the sun.
I find the Italian the Austro-Fascists are quite interesting because to me, I kind of have probably the most sympathy for them out of the lot, just because it seems to me like they're dealing with some pretty, what you might call extreme pressures from the outside. So from the Germans and also from the National Socialists sort of within the country. So, and kind of trying to make an end run around that and also ally themselves with fascist Italy, to me makes it made tactical sense to me.
Right. I mean, and the Ustashi, try and play Berlin and Italy off against each other. So they have both Italian and German military in what is now Bosnia-Herzegovina, fighting against Tito's partisans. Like the coastal area, Dalmatia, is assigned to the Italians and the interior to the Germans.
Yeah, no, that was really interesting. I had listened to that a couple days ago, that talk you did on Croatia and sort of the partisans that they were sort of dealing with there. It's really, the whole history of the Balkans is an aspect of European history which I find tends to get overlooked. Like they're like the Balkans. Wait, there's countries called Moldova and Croatia. What? But it's a really it seems to be a very active, if I could put it in that terms, a very active area of the map.
Its history is not actually really studied in terms of Europe. Where you see it studied is in terms of the Ottoman Empire, well, at least for the early modern and modern period. So from about the 15th century to the end of World War One, it's considered to be like part of the Middle East because of Ottoman rule.
Yeah, that would make sense, and that also kind of, I think that kind of, I don't exactly want to use the term xenophobia, but that sort of ethnocentric
Orientalism.
Yeah. Orientalism. That's sort of an ethnocentric character that you find in that region still to this day. I think it is indicative of that sort of border experience with the Austrian Empire for so many years. So if you look at the places in Europe today which are sort of, the most based or whatever, they tend to be these Eastern European Balkan sort of regions which have had continual run-ins with their neighbors to the east and also amongst themselves. And so I think that kind of idea, that sort of experience of having to deal with these multicultural conflicts and whatnot on a fairly regular basis kind of insulates them a little bit from kind of the stuff that we see going on in, Western Europe today in the Anglosphere.
Perhaps the big explanation I always hear is that communism kind of froze them, so they're way behind on receiving the pause because they were kind of like put in the freezer while everybody else was put in the microwave.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do think that has a part to play with it, but also, again, like, I also think partially the geography of the area may have something to do with it as well, and the same sort of theme with, like, it's kind of like Middle East Junior in a certain sense, in the fact that they've had to deal continually for centuries with basically outsiders coming in, ransacking the place or taking over, and then attempting to slowly push them out and stuff. So, and most of these places were also under the control of one empire or another at any given period of time. So, Serbia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Before that, they were kind of butting heads with the Ottomans. And so it's I think that kind of that border territory which they reside, coupled with the sort of maybe the legacy of communism, maybe, I think has something to do with it. And also possibly Orthodox Christianity relative to other Christian sects also tends to be a bit more ethnocentric as well. But whether that's because of the religion itself or because of, again, these other factors that we'd mentioned, I'm not exactly sure.
Well, and the Balkans, I'm quite sure it's because of the millet system the Ottomans imposed. So this was kind of a backdoor way into national representation, is that you got autonomy with your community, at least as far as application of religious laws and family law, by being a recognized millet. So originally there were only three: the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Church, and the Jews. But then the Serbians were the first. They wanted to get out from under control of the Greek Patriarchy in Constantinople. So they demanded that they get their own millet. And then once this started occurring, then every other Orthodox Christian country wanted their own millet. So the Bulgarians and the Romanians also got their separate. So this was a way of getting national autonomy that was allowed by the Sultanate, because they created the millet and gave official sanctions to the various heads of the millet.
So that's kind of how some of these different patriarchates kind of broke away from Constantinople, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And the Serbs were the first to break away from the Greeks.
And when was this?
I'd have to go look it up again, but certainly it would while the Ottomans ruled the Balkans. So,
Okay.
so this is where you get the differences in the churches in Serbia and Bulgaria and Romania.
Okay. Yeah, and of course, Russia had its own patriarchate at this time,
Right.
correct? So in Moscow.
Correct. And there's also has been and still is a separate Ukrainian Orthodox Patriarch. And then there's other Eastern religions that I guess they're not. I guess the Greek rite and structure technically. So there's the Unionites who have Greek liturgy but recognize Rome.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them in Lebanon. There's some in Iraq. There's a bunch in Ukraine. There's also these monophasic religions where they don't recognize Jesus as having a human form, only a divine form. So the Copts in Egypt and the Armenians.
Yeah. No, and that particular split between the that is some cause of what would we say dispute amongst what is the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, so the Armenians and the Copts and so on and so forth. Yeah, so like they will say they're not monophysites, and then the East has gotten to the point now where they're kind of like, okay, we believe you're not monophysites, but they're just like slow stepping unity essentially at this point. So, but that was
it was a big enough issue that the Ottomans had them as two separate religious millets.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, because I think the big thing is that a lot of it was political, but I think the Asian or no, sorry, the Oriental Orthodox churches, as they're called, like Armenia and stuff, I think they only signed on to the first four ecumenical councils, and then for whatever reason they didn't sign on to the ones after that, and so you know how it goes.
Yeah,
and there's
right. We're getting straight because we moved in here because there was a number of Italian inspired movements in the Balkans, Ustashi in Croatia, and then of course the Legion of Archangel Michael, and then the Iron Guard in Romania being two most prominent and well known.
Yeah. No, they're definitely the big ones. And another example, and one of the things that sort of also sets aside normative fascism from National Socialism is the anti-Semitism issue. So there's really none of that in Italian fascism, but
no, in fact, I would say, and this may be controversial, that the average white American in the 1940s was and 30s particularly was more anti-Semitic than the average Italian.
No, that certainly might be the case. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But the places where you do see some sort of anti-Semitic violence amongst fascist movements is in Romania with the Iron Guard.
You see it in Croatia too.
And a lot
there were about 12,000 Jews that died in Jasenovac.
Yeah, but in Romania specifically, as far as I can tell, their reasons for it were a bit more, I don't want to say mundane, but it wasn't the sort of like racialized social Darwinism sort of explanations that you find in National Socialism. It was just basically like local ethnic tensions, like what you would see earlier, but now with kind of updated equipment and ideology. So it was less scientific, if you want to put it that way, than what you would find in the German phenomenon.
Right. Yeah, and also it's more personalized in the Balkans. So for the Germans, it's kind of this extermination, as if getting rid of rats or
Yeah.
other vermin. Umgeziefer would be the German term. Whereas in Romania and in Croatia, you have these rather brutal kind of pogroms or one-on-one killings in Jasenovac that are kind of like personal revenge, as opposed to a banality of evil, to use the word from Hannah Arendt, just to eliminate an infestation, but there's not too much personal emotion involved in it, the way you see in places like Transnistria or Jasenovac.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess I sort of understand what was happening in Romania and stuff more. I mean, obviously, not cool, but it was less. It was less. It was less banality of evil, as you put it.
Well, I didn't put it. Hannah Arendt did.
Right, but
but
just quoting
yeah.
quoting Hannah Arendt, yeah.
All right. So that would be, and the other thing I didn't notice. We fascism is held up as this kind of ultimate evil versus the ultimate good of democracy. But I'm trying to figure out exactly what are the rubric for this measurement, because
what yardstick
if
are
we
you
look
using?
at the most ruthless, as it were, element of Italian fascism, it's the war in Ethiopia. So maybe 750,000 people dead on both sides. Most of them, of course, Ethiopian. But that's not a lot compared to even small wars that have been fought after the Second World War. So I think the number of Koreans that died in the Korean War is 3 million. The number of Vietnamese to die in the section of the war which the U.S. participated in is 3.5 million, and then there's another 600,000 Cambodians, maybe another 70,000 Laotians. 750,000 is those are rookie numbers.
Yeah, I get those number up. Those are rookie numbers. No, you're absolutely right about that, and that's kind of what I said. Kind of a little bit earlier. It's I'm not comparing fascism to some like model regime or anything, but again, if we compare the Italians to other regimes at the time, or even regimes that came later, were they any more particularly violent than those? I just don't see it. Essentially, like, most European powers had colonialism, and even after, post-colonialism after World War II, when they begin drawing down all this sort of stuff, the sort of some of the wars that you see in the wake of colonialism, those can also get pretty dicey. And also, again, like you're talking about, U.S. foreign involvement in Vietnam, Korea, and whatnot. Those are incredibly bloody. And even some of the some other like unaffiliated wars, like with it might not quite be Ethiopian numbers, but it's approaching it, like the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. That killed a lot of people. Yeah,
the
that killed a lot
war
of people
was
too.
at least 1 million dead, mostly Iranian.
Yeah, and that was quite bloody, And so, but they weren't fascists though, right? So yeah, we got.
Well, I don't know. I've heard people claim that the Ba'athists in Iraq were a type of fascist.
Yeah,
I've seen a number of Kurdish intellectuals make that argument.
I will say that in this one case, it's not entirely crazy that they would think that. because Baathism is kind of, it's fascist-ic. It's not bona fide fascism, but it does have certain elements that I would understand why someone would think that. But again, it's a little more. It lacks certain elements that you find in fascism that would set it apart. Like there was nothing of, unless I'm much mistaken, there was nothing of the kind of nationalist spirit in Baathism that you would find in Italian fascism, for example. And part of the reason for that is, Iraq has got, these disparate groups. So anything that they would try to impose on that would be, kind of by definition, fairly synthetic compared to the Italian model. But
the argument is that they tried to impose an Arabism upon the non-Arab population.
Yeah. Right. We're all Arabs now. Yeah. Kind of like with Pan-Africanism. We're all black now, or Aryanism.
We can get to
we're
that.
All white now. Yeah.
We can get to Pan-Africanism.
Sure.
Which has an interesting history, because of the 6 regions the African Union recognizes, up until 1946, only one of them was involved in Pan-Africanism, and it's the one that's not in Africa, the quote-unquote black diaspora. And so it's only the Manchester conference in 46 that you have, basically an African as opposed to a West Indian majority of delegates for Pan-Africanism. But historically, right, this idea of Pan-Africanism for a while in the 1950s and 60s into the 70s was fairly strong among African intellectuals. You had the Pan-African Congress in South Africa, of course, and leaders like Nkrumah in Ghana said if independence of Ghana doesn't lead to independence of the rest of the continent, it has been a failure. But now there seem to be, after the death of Gaddafi, no more Pan-Africanists left, really.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about a bit before the show got started, here in South Africa in particular, there is this drive among certain political elements within the country for just that, for Pan-Africanism, to create a borderless, sort of African super state. So they're trying to sort of make Africa like the EU, basically. And one of the big proponents of this right now is Julius Malema, head of the Economic Freedom Fighters. He was calling to basically, again, like this sort of Pan-Africanist idea where he literally wants to wipe away the borders and allow for like free travel and stuff, which, is just
This is very popular policy in Nigeria, I bet.
Yeah. There's this beautiful tweet that he put out a while ago. I sometimes check up on what Julius has been up to recently, but I'll see if I can find it. But it's this. Where is it? I'm so close. Where is it? But essentially, his exact words were, "Come on, Julius, where are you at?" Okay, so one of the things, and this is pretty big news, is they're trying to create an African passport that is expected to roll out in 2021. And
the African Union is going to do this?
Yeah, the new African Union passport is expected to take place in 2021 as part of the continent's African Continental Free Trade Area.
You're going to get a lot of people, Nigerians, Ghanaians. There's lots of people lining up get the South African airline flights to Joburg already.
Yeah, and it says right here, So far, only government leaders, diplomats, and AU officials have been issued with the passport. Travel restrictions are mostly being lifted across the continent, and this combined with the first approval of the COVID-19 vaccines bodes well for the implementation of the African continental free trade areas. And if we go down to the goals of this, this is in businesstech.co.za. So this isn't like some, fringe publication or anything. It says the free movement of persons in Africa is expected to deliver several key benefits for all participating countries, including South Africa. It says boosting intra-African trade, commerce, and tourism, facilitating labor mobility, intra-African knowledge and skills transfer. And I love this one, promoting Pan-African identity, social integration, and tourism. So basically, it's going to be, the idea is you're not Ghanaian, you're not Shwana, you're not Zulu, you're not Xhosa, you're not Sutu, you're all black now. At least that's what it's going to be in theory. Improving transborder infrastructures, fostering comprehensive approach to border management.
I think promoting. This looks like to me it's that the more developed African countries are looking for a way to get cheap labor from the less developed ones at the expense of their own populations.
Yeah, so they may go through with this. Here's how I see this happening in actuality. As someone who lives down here, who sees
everybody in Zimbabwe move across the border tomorrow.
What's going to happen
next?
Next, yeah. What I really think is going to happen is, particularly in South Africa, if this goes through, and the amount of, and there is quite a lot of people who are illegal immigrants in South Africa already, you're going to see some really, really bad inter-ethnic violence.
You've already seen that, haven't you?
You already have.
Migrants from Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, and Nigeria.
Yep. And just a while ago, maybe, I guess last year, maybe, I actually went into town while this was happening. There was hundreds of squatters outside of the Parliament building in downtown Cape Town. And the reason for it is that they wanted to be, I think, expatriated by the UN back to their countries or something like that. And, it was partially because I think some of them were being targeted. And they wanted some, I can't remember. There was one aspect of their demands that made me raise my eyebrow a little, but I think part of it was they wanted to get repatriated. So there's, in South Africa right now, the unemployment rate, is over 35%. So close to 40, let's just say 40%. And that's not an exaggeration. I'm not grossly exaggerating the numbers. It's around 40% right now.
No,
and if you
and the real number of people actually working is probably less because of the way these numbers are counted.
Yeah, it certainly could be the case. And of course, there's a fairly sizable black market here. People in the townships and the shanty towns, running like cash only operations and stuff.
I'm well aware of the informal African market.
Yeah. But nevertheless, there are millions and millions of people here who are living in squalor outside of the cities in townships. And I don't think they're going to take too well to millions of foreigners coming in and setting up right next to them. So we've already seen, like you said, we've seen this sort of violence happen before. It was pretty bad in 2007, 2008, 2009 after the financial crisis. There was actually like a public campaign to end xenophobia, they call it. And yeah, this sort of stuff kind of happens at a low level all the time in this country. So amping up and increasing, putting even more pressure on the domestic population who can't be absorbed in the labor market.
It's anything the EFF or ANC does is going to make the average black South African love Nigerian criminals moving into South Africa.
No, probably not. Probably not. I would.
And while I don't want to stereotype Nigerians, they're a disproportionately large enough number of their diaspora in other African countries engaged in criminal activity that you can understand why there's almost a universal Pan-African prejudice against them.
Yeah, well, I'll just say the only guy I ever got ripped off here in South Africa, I think, was a Nigerian guy. So
But they're
that
not
may be
like at
true.
all in Ghana. And in fact, even though there are laws against it, uh, police will routinely stop vehicles with Nigerian plates because they suspect they're just up to no good.
Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, we'll see with this whole Pan Africanism thing. God, I sure hope that it doesn't go through.
But
But if it does,
one of
I'm
my
expecting
former students in Ghana became head of the customs police at the international airport.
Mm-hmm.
And his big accomplishment was he stopped the smuggling of cocaine. Was being done by Nigerian gangs. They used Ghana because it wasn't under as much scrutiny to smuggle cocaine coming from Colombia to Europe via Africa. So there are criminal gangs from Nigeria because it's got such a large population, just about in every major urban area in Africa, and that will increase if you uh, remove travel restrictions.
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt about it. And this country has already got some massive crime problems, anyways. So, like,
Right.
just one example, like, I think also, and also in terms of drugs. So, I think I read recently that something like 25% of all the drugs within the United Kingdom are actually have their point of origin in Cape Town. So, yeah, drug trade's big in Africa. Human trafficking, big problem. Arms trafficking, anything you want, you can get, illicit or otherwise here. So, and yeah, pumping in a bunch of Nigerians and Mozambicans and Zimbabweans and whatnot. This is just going to cause all sorts of social tensions.
All right. Well, um, I'm not familiar with Zimbabwean and Mozambican criminals, but the Nigerian criminals certainly existed in Ghana, where
The Zimbabwe,
they did have a right to freely move into Ghana under ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States. It also has allowed large numbers of displaced Liberians to move in, but the fact that these people share a skin color and a continent, and even in this case, a language, English, does not eliminate some crucial differences.
yeah, no, definitely. And the Zimbabweans, I will say, actually seem to be relatively pretty law abiding here in South Africa. Like a lot of the Uber drivers I've had have been Zimbabweans. I know some domestic workers who are Zimbabweans, and yeah, it's I think most of the problem is with Nigerians, and also there's a bit of some tensions with the Somalis, I believe, as well. But that's mostly in the townships, and but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't think Ghana had any Somalis. We had a lot of Tuaregs from Niger that were basically just beggars. None of them seemed to be employed, so they were not particularly liked by many of the Ghanaians.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Ooh, hey, sorry, Paul. I'm it's hot. It's hot as hell in here, and I gotta get some more ice water. I'll be right back.
Nope, no problem. I'll look at the chat here, see if well, go ahead, get some water. All right, so if I see any questions. They're talking about watches in the chat, which I don't think has much to do with either Italian fascism or Pan-Africanism or yeah, I saw Eki that is a horological chat now. You you didn't like the topics of fascism or Pan-Africanism, you've decided to talk about chronometers. Wow.
Okay, so yeah, my wife's she's back there and just managed to put the baby asleep, so they're not using the fan anymore. So I was like, "Hey, can I take the fan, please?"
There you go. You know,
Yeah.
in Ghana they have what's called doom sor, which is the power going off and on, and it comes from the sound the fan makes. It goes off, it goes doom, and when it comes back on, it goes soar. But I noticed a lot of doom and not much soar when I was there.
A lot of doom. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, our electrical grid's not there quite yet. It's taken some hits though. That's for damn sure. Like we've had rolling blackouts and whatnot while I've been here. Right now, there's not any, but who's to say what's going to happen tomorrow? So yeah, that's the problem with Africa. You know, these they get their independence, and then the first thing they do is turn the state into a ginormous patronage machine, and things stop working.
But I did want that something recent. I don't follow recent news for lots of places like I did. It was so much easier to follow international news in the 80s than it is today. But I noticed that Uganda told
Oh yeah.
told the global rulers to go pound salt. So this has happened to some African countries before: Ghana under Nkrumah, Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara. But they usually ended up being overthrown in coups or assassinated in the case of Sankara. Is it safe now for African countries like Uganda to assert sovereignty against the international capitalist order, or is it going to be like the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, where the states are too weak to be able to make such a statement without the government of the U.S. or France or some other member of the machine physically removing them from power?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There's my guess. I think, particularly with the end of the Cold War, and also the change in American foreign policy of late, I think that kind of thing is kind of on the decline. One of the people that I cite on this is Peter Zeihan. I don't know if you're aware of who he is, but he does like geopolitical analysis and whatnot. He's a private kind of geopolitical analysis. He used to work for Stratfor. And one of the things that he points to is that U.S. military deployment internationally right now is at the lowest it's been since like the 1920s.
But the U.S. didn't deploy any soldiers to overthrow Nkrumah in '66. They just had the CIA support the
throw money to
elements
whoever.
of the Ghanaian army and police. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I just haven't seen a lot of regime toppling after the Obama era. That may change now.
I'll tell you, but with Libya. But here's what I did see. I saw the IMF and World Bank say to Ghana, you have to remove all of your subsidies and social spending, or you don't get any more loan restructuring to support your currency.
Yeah, no, that kind of thing does happen. The sort of lean on these countries economically. but I do think I'm not exactly sure what the future is going to be. I do foresee, and I think we have seen some degree of withdrawal from the sort of CIA shenanigans, but who knows, man? It may come back. I'm hoping it doesn't, but it might. A lot of these countries, they're not exactly bastions of financial responsibility, so they do get themselves into these financial jams, and then they sort of come to the IMF or whoever with their hand in their hat, and of course there's strings attached, and people are a little bit worried about that with South Africa, just because the financial system here the fiscal situation here in this country is not good. But the problem with that is most of the debt in South Africa is local, so we owe it to ourselves, basically. So, as I understand it, the IMF mostly steps in to bail out these countries if there are like a lot of foreign creditors on the line. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, a lot of cases, I think, particularly I noticed in Ghana, it was because of the continual collapse of the currency. The IMF was basically shoring up the Ghanaian CD, which was in constant free fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my understanding is that since, in recent years, at least since Zuma, the rand has not been doing so well.
Yeah, no, it's not. The South African rand right now is exchanging at about just over 15 to the dollar. So when I came here, it was closer to about 12 to the dollar.
So I remember it was like 4 to the dollar under Mbeki.
Not anymore. Yeah, and a while ago it was it got up to 17 to the dollar a number of months ago. So yeah, and it's a very volatile currency. So it'll go up and it'll go down. It'll go up and it'll go down. But yeah, it's not good. And I guess that volatility makes it good for currency trading, because volatility is good for speculation. But as a stored holder of value, it's not the most reliable in the world. It's not Zimbabwe status, but it's not.
Well, Zimbabwe has no currency, right? Everything's in dollars or rand or euros.
No, that's correct. But yeah, for a while there, it was going bananas. This is the Zimbabwe dollar.
Yeah. All right. So you don't think there will be conflict between those states that want to resist kind of foreign interference, patronage into their own patronage systems, like Uganda is doing? You think that they'll be able to successfully maintain autonomous status vis-a-vis the international capitalist system?
I think it might. It sort of depends on sort of what's at risk. So a place like South Africa, just because comparatively speaking, there's a lot more foreign interest here, they might. But if you look at a country,
I don't think South Africa has leadership in the ANC, but certainly Rwanda, Uganda, some of these East African countries, maybe Ethiopia. There seems to be a strong enough authoritarian president that's has enough kind of national support that they can say, "Look, we're the days of colonialism are over. We'll do what we want here."
Yeah, no, and of all the countries you mentioned, Rwanda is the one that's probably doing the best. So, but I'm not so sure. I think it'll sort of depend on a case-by-case basis. So if you look at Zimbabwe, for instance, the world the world's been quite happy to sort of stand by and let that place become a shithole and not do anything about it. So, I think it sort of depends, I guess is the best way I can put it. Because
where has the world intervened positively in Africa? In, let's just say, my lifetime. So since 1970.
Can't think of too many places. And again, I'm not saying that there would be a positive intervention. I'm just saying the Zimbabwean government, Mugabe, and now the general who's taken over from him, they've, as far as I can tell, they've more or less been allowed to, do what they want within their country. So it's actually at the point now where they're trying to make some concessions. So one of the things that the Zimbabwean government's trying to do is get some of the farmers they kicked out to try and come back and like recompensate them for their land and stuff. But, as you can probably imagine, a lot of those farmers are like, I don't know if I want to come back. You guys kicked me out the last time. So we'll see. I think it's sort of just up in the air and kind of have to take it on a case by case basis for some of these countries. Maybe if it's if there's a strategic location like somewhere out on the Persian Gulf or something, yeah, there may be some intervention there just because of the trade routes that go around. Sea. Yeah, sorry, the Red Sea. Then
we intervened in Somalia, and that was so successful.
Right. But the reason they intervened in Somalia and not Rwanda is probably for that very reason. It's just the sheer amount of product that gets shipped through there, and they didn't want any hiccups coming on down the line. So that would be my guess.
So now we have an unlimited supply of Somali pirates.
Yeah. These things always work better when you write them down.
Obviously, most of post-colonial Africa's problems are a result of bad leadership by indigenous Africans. But where there has been kind of attempts to, by the Europeans and Americans and others to intervene, quote unquote, to improve things, it seemed to have made it even worse. It seemed to have accelerated the absolute worst elements of indigenous corruption and repression. So, as Jean-Francois Revel said, it's as if studying Western history, African leaders decided to reject Greek democracy and Roman law in favor of Greek slavery and Roman infanticide.
Yeah. No, that's true. And, if there are, cases of countries that are doing okay, like I said, Rwanda is doing all right, but also Rwanda is getting a little bit of heat for, kind of being an authoritarian regime, right? So I don't expect them to overthrow Kagame.
Here's the thing. Most of the successful African states where you've had improvement in the social conditions of the population have been authoritarian. Probably the best example, Burkina Faso from 83 to 87. Thomas Sankara never even bothered to think about elections. It just wasn't important.
Yeah, and that's the thing that kind of gets overlooked a lot. If you look at most countries that kind of have gotten wealthy and relatively affluent over the course of the 20th century, basically none of them started off as democracies. They became rich and then they became democracies. Whether you're looking at South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Rhodesia, comparatively, compared to the rest of Africa, or South Africa, or Chile.
Wait. South Africa and Rhodesia went from being limited franchise democracies to full franchise, but there seemed to have been economic decline after the expansion of the franchise for voting.
Right. So the thing is their big crime is they weren't liberal democracies. Is essentially it. So yeah, no, it's.
But I don't think there's.
So,
I mean, it doesn't seem to fit in with the pattern you were giving East Asia. Obviously, you have authoritarian states that are quite poor,
right.
like South Korea and Taiwan, and Singapore, that then become rich and then become liberalized and democratized relatively peacefully, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those ones were definitely more traditional authoritarian regimes. But of course, what you had in Rhodesia and South Africa was different. You had limited franchise of the kind that you would find in early America, essentially. So yeah, different. But the point being is that all these countries, what they have in common is they didn't progress and become richer through one man, one vote liberal democracy. So that usually seems to come after. And then ironically afterwards, you do end up seeing some problems sometimes. So yeah, I mean, the notion that we'll just give these people democracy and everything will be okay doesn't. I mean, if you look at the scorecard throughout recent modern history, it doesn't seem to work too well. But yeah, I know.
Well, but I think the point why I don't know if this is the case so much in South Africa because of it's kind of different from the rest of the continent, but many of the countries that were under direct colonial rule, there is among the intellectual classes a rejection of the idea of democracy because they view these multi-party elections to parliament as just a way for foreign governments to basically get control of the resources through having their own factions in parliament, right? Basically, whereas if you had one guy, say Paul Kagame in Rwanda is a good example, or the president of Uganda, or during the brief time in the 80s, Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, who says no, right? Then you can exert sovereignty against much larger forces, or at least you can make the stand. Whereas if you've got a parliament that's bought out, I mean, you look at the Ghanaian parliament, how many of those guys are just basically working directly for Cadbury, the chocolate company?
Yeah,
I'm serious.
No, that's a good point. I think this idea the what you call it, the division of power, right? I think that is, and academic agent mentioned this, and I think it's true. Whether or not it's a good thing, I think it's a fact that what it does is it creates multiple nexuses for corruption, is what it does. So you just disperse the system with all these little dudes who are all little choke points on sort of what can happen.
500 rats in parliament instead of one guy saying, I'm the only guy who's allowed to take a take. And what I don't take, I give to the people.
Right, exactly. So it just ends up creating this web of, different competing interests and whatnot, and all these different little people on the take. And instead of, like you say, with one guy sort of skimming from the top and then like dishing out the rest, then what you have is all these other little people under him, like taking little bites. And it ends up actually being a worse situation in the end. And then you also get, sclerotic institutions, gridlock, and it's just not good. One example of this that I always like to look at is Eskom. Eskom is the national power company in South Africa. And if you look at electrical output in megawatt hours between 2003 and 2016, which is sort of the graph that I was looking at, it's basically flat. So there's no new electricity put on the grid. But if you look at the amount of people on payroll at Eskom between that period of time, it more than doubles.
I think patronage.
Yeah, exactly. It almost triples. So, and this is all because you got all these people you have cater to deployment. We'll get our guys in there, and then they'll sort of follow. It's just a big fucking mess is what it is. And it's all you have this advisory board, and you have these trade unions, and they're like, oh, we exist. ESCOM should exist for jobs first, electricity second, and labor laws, and it's just a big freaking mess. Whereas if you had a more sort of centralized power system, like real power, where somebody was able to, like a Paul Kagame character, or if you look at
he's
Singapore,
a good example for Africa, because we've seen he's been in power for a while in an African context and been effective.
Yeah, that's true. Or if you look at somebody like in East Asia, like Lee Kuan Yew, is basically, he has the authority to basically, smash all their rice bowls if they want, and put new people in there if he wanted to. So they're able to kind of keep things more on the level than what you have now, where it's just basically a free for all for who can loot the most, the fastest.
Right. So this is why a lot of, going back to the 1950s and 60s, a lot of African intellectuals were supportive of developmentalist dictatorships over the idea of a formalistic democratic system that was in reality, some sort of neo-colonial head stooge of European corporations, right?
Yeah, no, and in that regard, on that point at least, I can kind of agree with them. I think they have a little bit more to worry about their internal interests than necessarily foreign ones in most cases. But
this is true. But it only works because there's internal corruption. There are all kinds of other reasons as well. But if you look at Rwanda as a good example, right? Kagame has brought up the standard of living of Rwanda since he's been in power, in addition to stopping the genocide against the Tutsi. So you can look at things like higher education is a really good example in Rwanda, that it is doing much better than many other countries in Africa. So it is relative to other African states who are richer in resources, doing better largely as a result of having authoritarian rather than fake democratic leadership.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. Yeah, and if you just look at the economic figures of, Rwanda, they're just kind of going up and up. The growth that country's seen. I actually have a friend who's Rwandan, and he remembers back in the bad old days, the genocide and all that. And he's like, yeah, if you go there now, it's a totally different country in terms of the amount of development that's happened and so on and so forth. So yeah, you still have, like, if you look at and it's a little bit misleading. So like, if you look at the unemployment rate in Rwanda right now, you'll be like, oh, it's really high. But you got to keep in mind that it's not that those people out in the country are kind of like poor people in the cities. They're basically living a pre-cash, in a sort of pre-cash economy with sort of subsistence agriculture and whatnot. So they're just kind of living the way they've
But I think you've got to be relative. Nobody's saying that Rwanda is as developed as Belgium or the Netherlands. The argument is that compared to many other African states, that in recent decades, it has done much better.
Right? Exactly. So, and that's the thing I was kind of getting to is it's the Rwanda has developed a tremendous amount for Africa, right? So the amount of labor force, the absorption rate sort of within the city the capital has, it's been pretty impressive, and right in Kigali, but out in sort of the countryside and whatnot, things haven't quite modernized out there. But I think the lifestyle of people living kind of in sort of those areas in the traditional way they've essentially have always lived, if you compare that to like some guy in Kailicha living in a shack outside of Cape Town who can't find a job, to me that seems a much more
well, obviously, if you've got farmland to grow food, you're better than being in a squatter town.
Yeah, no, that's for sure, and I think that's partially why you see a little bit less in terms of crime and violence in Rwanda compared to South Africa in that specific sense.
I haven't been to Kigali. I did go to a conference run by Rwandans in Sacramento, a conference on genocide. So hopefully, if they do occasionally have conferences in Kigali. So maybe you get to go there. It's the one country in Africa that I'd like to go to that I haven't been to, having spent I guess over 5 years in Ghana, which is
I'd like to go.
Ghana has the advantage of being a former British colony, so everybody speaks English.
Yeah, whereas in Rwanda, it's well, French.
No, they've been moving to try and go from French to English, but obviously it's the British made Ghana a colony in 1874, so they have a head start.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's true. But yeah, I would definitely like to go up to Rwanda and give it a look. I mean, it sounds like a pretty interesting place, at least. And when my friend Pascal goes back up there, maybe I'll tag along with him. It would be interesting to go see.
Yeah, I guess there's direct flights from Qatar to Kigali. So you can get a Qatar Airlines flight from LaGuardia to Doha, and then go from Doha to Kigali if you're coming from the U.S., which is an awful long flight, but I think it's about the only way to do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm used to long flights, man. Going from Alaska to South Africa, that's it's about as long.
When I first went to Ghana, I took a United Arab Emirates Airlines. So I had to fly to Dubai and spend 12 hours in Dubai, and then fly to Ghana. So I literally flew across Africa twice.
Yeah. No, my usual trip when I want to go back home is I'll fly from, depending. So I think the last time we went, we flew from Cape Town to, this one was actually pretty easy. We flew from Cape Town to Amsterdam, and then we went over the North Pole and landed in Minneapolis, and then we went from there to Seattle, and then we went from Seattle to Anchorage. So just a lot of but too much flying.
In the old days, it used to be people would fly Aeroflot from Ghana through Libya, and they spend a day in Libya and then go to Moscow and then go to Europe.
Yeah. No, and honestly, when you're taking long flights like that, chopping it up like that, where you take a day to just sort of stay somewhere else, it's probably the way to go.
Yeah, then that happened to me. I was it wasn't that long a flight, because the first leg I did, it didn't, but I got stuck on the way back to Iraq from Moscow in Istanbul, and had to spend a day there.
Yeah, the last time I spent a night, I think I just sort of stayed a night in Johannesburg. So I was flying from.
You didn't even get out of the country.
Yeah, I flew from Cape Town to Johannesburg, stayed a night for some weird reason, and then I flew to Dubai, and then I went from Dubai to I think Seattle.
That's a long flight. Yeah,
It was either Dubai to Seattle, or it was
I've done
Dubai
the LA to Dubai.
Yeah, it might. No, I think it was Cape Town to Joburg, Joburg to Dubai, Dubai to Germany, and then Germany to Seattle. Or it might have just been freaking Dubai to Seattle. It was a long flight.
I think you can do Dubai to Seattle, but that's a long flight because I did LA to Dubai and it was forever.
Yeah, no, it is forever. It takes so long.
All right. So let's see. So you don't think that you think of Pan-Africanism as it was originally developed? Do you think it's going to make a comeback, or do we just have this kind of Pan-Africanism to justify cheap labor moving into the more industrialized African states?
I think it's going to come back. The reasons for it may be more cynical, like you're saying, but I don't think it's necessarily going to work just because I think there's going to be a pretty big backlash to it. But I don't know. We'll see. No matter what happens, if they do go through with this, I think it's going to be pretty dicey here for a time. But yeah, I don't know. All bets are off as far as I'm concerned on this. Like I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think they're going to go through with it. I think there's interest in sort of seeing this take place for a host of reasons, but yeah, whether it's successful or not remains to be seen.
Okay.
And I hope it doesn't happen, but what I hope and what actually happens are very often divergent.
And to kind of tie the two topics together, I know that there's kind of been, even going back to the 30s, the idea of black fascism. So we talked about developmentalist dictatorships in Africa, and you can go back to Nasser in Egypt, Nkrumah in Ghana. In some senses, these regimes have some similarities with Italian fascism. And there are, of course, movements that are more radical in places. Oh, can there be kind of a African version of fascism? Is this something that should be looked at theoretically, or a way of categorizing certain political movements?
Yeah, a historian that sort of brought this up was A. James Greger. His argument is that fascism is essentially alive and well, and sort of these African dictatorships. The problem I see with that is fascism is attempting to, and at least kind of successfully attempting to make a sort of authoritarian developmental state. But
didn't Nasser do that in Egypt to some extent?
Yeah, but I mean, like if you compare it, it's sort of like prolonged, successful growth in sort of like Black Africa, right? You don't really see that sort of take place, and also the governments function much more like kleptocracies than what you would see with like sort of a fascist movement. And they're anti-colonial, and they'll often kind of, at least back in the day, in the 70s and whatnot, during the Cold War, they would sort of make overtures to the Soviet Union and stuff. But their friendliness to communist internationalism was basically platitudes, right? So they didn't seem.
Well, could they get stuff for it?
Yeah, they didn't seem none too interested in,
I used to explain it to my Ghanaian students as African national liberation movements fighting against European colonialism go to Moscow and they get a little sheet. Says, "Do you support workers of the world uniting for socialism? Check here for AK-47s.
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
support international socialist a brotherhood under the leadership of the USSR? Check here for RPGs."
Yeah. No, that's essentially it. So they're basically like I don't know if I should say post ideological or like pre ideological.
Well, post-ideological is a term used in Ghana to describe a lot of African governments, is that they don't have any ideological base other than giving gibs to themselves. So they're just patronage networks.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. So yeah, I mean, some of them may sort of have this sort of military aesthetic and whatnot, and you know, in theory, they claim to be trying to make a developmental state, but really, like you say, it's just a massive patronage network. So I don't really see it as being some sort of a bona fide fascist movements. The one thing that is kind of interesting is if you look at certain political parties, though, like the EFF, they are sometimes called fascist by like the liberals who live here. They're like, "Oh, the EFF is fascist," by which they mean Nazi authoritarian or whatever. But yeah, they're interesting because on the one hand, they want to implement, in theory, kind of like Leninist style sort of nationalizations and stuff. But on the other hand, they're black racial nationalists and Pan-African and also anti-white. So there are some like interesting similarities you could draw between them and the Nazis. Because
the only one though I really see is the racial scapegoating.
Yeah.
I don't think the Pan-African thing is really deep. I do think the anti-white hatred is deep, and I guess in that sense it's a parallel to Nazi anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the thing. So the Nash and within South Africa, if we forget about the Pan-African stuff, we just stick with South Africa. They're sort of black nationalist, right? So they're not like ethnic nationalists. There's a strong racial component. So they're not like a party for Zulus. They're not a party for Xhosas. They're not a party.
Zulus already have a party.
Yeah, in Kata. But so they're black racial nationalists. They sort of want to do like they advocate sort of pseudo Marxism and sort of having a really focused, highly competent revolutionary vanguard, which I got to give it to them. They're pretty effective at what they do. But also with this minority scapegoating and whatnot. So in a way, they're like, as we said earlier, kind of sui generis. They're kind of their own thing. And I wouldn't call them fascist, though.
No, but and you have seen Marxist-Leninist movements that have strong racial components. The communists in North Korea, the communists in Cambodia. Obviously, no minorities in Korea, but the Khmer Rouge did go after the Cham Muslims and what was left of the Vietnamese population in Cambodia.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, so there's the racial element. I think, yeah, like you say, that they can crop up, and like in Russia, you had Russification and all that kind of stuff. But I think that sort of came after the ideology, typically. So if you take communism it's sort of like these things sort of develop over time as sort of control mechanisms or kind of ways to try and smooth things over for the regime a little bit. But I don't think it's necessarily inherent in the communist ideology. But I could be wrong, because communism, in theory, is all about internationalism and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know.
In practice, because of the way human societies have developed, almost all Marxist-Leninist movements have become virulently nationalist. So
Yeah,
you see
socialist.
persecution of national and ethnic minorities throughout the socialist world. What's interesting is, as you said, usually this comes after they come into power. So the ideology pays lip service to international brotherhood and solidarity beforehand, whereas the EFF is openly calling for genocide against white people before it has seized power.
Exactly. So yeah, they're upfront about what they want. So yeah, it's and in that way it is a little different. So there is like a racial hierarchy that they sort of have their own internal.
So is it like just the reverse of apartheid? Whites are on the bottom, and then coloreds and Indians in the middle, and then blacks on the top?
Yeah, essentially, but more dangerous, I would say, if they ever got in control.
Well, I think obviously, genocide is considerably more extreme than separation.
Yeah, no, definitely, and the economics are kooky and just all the stuff. It's EFF for bad news. Period.
But one theory I've heard is the EFF is kind of just allowed to exist to make the ANC kind of do the dirty work that they don't want to do, to make the ANC look more centrist.
Kind of. So the dynamic between the EFF and the ANC is interesting. So Julius Malema was part of the ANC. He was head of the ANC Youth League, but then he got kicked out of the party, and then he made the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF. The thing is the EFF has, like you say, probably been useful for the ANC to push the party leftward and make them do what they want to do. So the EFF will be like, expropriate the land, take the land. And then the ANC will be like, no, we don't want to do it that way, but we will have some expropriation. Sort of
without
stuff.
compensation.
Yeah, without compensation. To sort of, so they can sort of be the appear as the more reasonable ones in the room. Right. So they'll be like, no, it'll just be like certain rural farmland, but we're not going to take your house or anything. And
it just seems to me that early on, if they wanted to, they could have squashed the EFF, but they found it useful to let them do their thing.
Yeah, and like I mentioned a bit earlier, in terms of party competence and whatnot, and running a tight ship for their organization, the EFF is probably the best in South Africa. They got a lot of college educated, kind of what you might call the displaced elites, like the ones who went through university and expected to get the golden ticket but didn't get it. They sort of joined the EFF essentially. So yeah, that's kind of the what they got going on there. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it is useful for the ANC to have the EFF around for that reason. And they're expecting possibly in this next election that the support for the ANC may dip below 50%. If that happens, I fully expect a coalition government between the ANC and the EFF to take place. Now, obviously, some people, they'll be like, yes, the ANC is below 50%. But personally, I would be a bit more worried about the ANC coming in conjunction with Julius Malema, who now has leverage to sort of like push them this way or that way.
Well, the golem has gotten big and strong because no action was taken. But I think for in the beginning, the ANC leadership thought that this was a useful tool, as you said, it allowed them to pose as being reasonable in comparison to the extremism of the EFF. But now, of course, they found the EFF is becoming more popular than them. Now it's problematic, but it's also too late at this point. It would have been easy to deal with them early on, especially since their rhetoric is clearly in violation of the what is it? What was the original charter of the ANC? The Freedom Charter, People's Charter, something like that.
I think it was called
but that is in terms of its writing. This is before they took power. This is during the apartheid era. Right. That is a document which is completely non-racial in its wording.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, yeah, man, I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen in South Africa. The only good thing I see is I think there may be a hard cap on EFF popularity. The second biggest party is the Democratic Alliance. The EFF is the third biggest. And right now, the EFF is calling to put a freeze on local 2022 elections and postpone them to 2024 because I think they're seeing some problems in terms of support. So two of the things that I think do not endear them to the local South Africans is during this COVID-19, they're very, very big on locking down. And they're like, basically lock us down harder, essentially. And, that's not particularly popular to a lot of people who have trouble finding a job in the best of times. And the next thing is this open immigration, Pan-Africanism. Believe it or not,
I don't see how that becomes popular at all, even among their core black and urban constituency.
Yeah, no, they do not want that at all. So I think they might have put their foot in their mouth with that. So and so when you put these things together,
and then of course, I don't suppose they have much support at all among the coloreds and Indians who are looking at if they might be next on the chopping block after the whites.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's no love lost between, especially coloreds and the EFF, and Indians. They're not into it either. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but it's going to be an interesting next decade in South Africa, I expect. What comes of it, I'm not sure. My guess, things just keep bumbling along as they have. We see gradual decline, or maybe like a authoritarian leftist government take place, sort of Venezuela style, or it's also possible that you have sort of coalition government, which can't sort of come up with any clear policy, and things it's just basically status quo. But the other option is that you have somebody, I don't know who it would be, basically try to do the developmentalist authoritarian right-wing direction. I think that would actually be very popular, to be honest. But not with the political
What about the idea of the country fracturing, the idea of the Cape trying to succeed, the idea of creating an independent Zulu state in Natal?
That would be ideal, but I just don't see the AFF letting the Cape in particular go just because it's too valuable. It clearly works better than the rest of the country.
How much power could the Zulus exert to achieve some sort of autonomy?
They could probably get some, particularly if things get bad enough. Then I think they may flip back to Inkatha from the ANC. And yeah, the king, goodwill, whoever, he'll just be like, yeah, we're out. I don't know. It could happen, but I don't see that happening unless things get quite a bit worse. I think the Cape will break away before KwaZulu Natal does, because of a lot of reasons. Again, mostly cultural, because the biggest racial group in the Western Cape are the coloreds, so that's part of it. And they're much more keen with free enterprise and sort of local business and stuff, and not nationalizing everything. So, yeah, who's to say? Okay. But that would be my wish if the Cape breaks away.
But you don't think it's likely?
Not immediately, no. But I would like to see it happen, or at the very least, de facto separation, where Pretoria and can make its edicts and whatever, but the Cape just kind of ignores them and it does their thing anyways. So we'll see.
Okay. Yeah. Well, at this point, obviously, strange and bizarre things have been happening for the last year or so. So I'm not gonna make any predictions myself.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right. Thank you for coming on. I'm not sure I have anything more to say at this point. The other stuff I just put on there to make it like symmetrical.
That's good, man. It's all good with me. I enjoyed coming on. It's a little bit here. I'm a bit tired. It's almost 11 o'clock.
All right, so I'll let you go, and I'll log out tonight. I'll be on at 9 p.m. California time to read some Brothers Grimm. It should be 30 to 45 minutes.
Nice. Yes, and if any of my subscribers are watching this, I would encourage you all to help get Dr. Paul over that 700 subscriber threshold tonight.
Yeah,
so
I'm like I'm like at 4 under. I need 4 more.
Yeah. So close, and
yeah, so close for months.
Yeah, let's put them over the top, right over the top. And if anyone's listening who's unfamiliar with my material, I would encourage you to go check out Mr. Patriarch on YouTube. I do history videos, also sort of meta politics and sort of commentary from a sort of traditionalist Christian perspective. So go check that out, and hope you enjoy it.
All right. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later. All right.
See you later. Good night.
All right. Bye. All right. I'll be back tonight at 9, and then I'll be on at Saturday at 7 p.m. California time.